So when I was in middle school, there was this kid, and he was the typical bully kid. And he used to pick on everybody, man. It was really scary. And I hated going on the bus because he was always on the bus, and he used to always pick on kids, and I never wanted to get picked on. And so I remember this one time, he was picking on the kid that was sitting across from me. And it got pretty bad. It got to the point where he was about to pour like a gallon of water on this dude. It was crazy. And I remember just kind of, for some crazy reason, standing up and looking the dude in the face, and I said, yo, you're not gonna pour that water in front of my friend, on my friend. And he kind of just like took a step back, and I remember thinking like, all right, this is it. This is where I get punched in the face. And he kind of took a step back and looked at me and said, you know what, I like you. And walked to the back of the bus and didn't bother anybody for the rest of the day. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this story is because when I was fearful, when there was a lot of great uncertainty, and when I was scared, I kind of just stood up and faced my fears. And I think God is calling the church right now, in the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of great uncertainty and fear and just chaos, I think God's calling us to stand up and be the light of the world and be the hope of this world. And it's so cool because I really am seeing that, and I think a lot of us are doing that. But I think a lot of us have other bullies that we're not talking about. Probably deep down inside, if you're honest with yourself, you're really scared of the future, man. You're really fearful. You're just scared and you don't know what's happening. You might be really sick right now. You might be unhealthy. You might be just really depressed or lonely because everyone's, practicing social distancing. And there's a lot of things that are going on. And I think right now, God is calling us, I believe, to just be that light of the world and to stand up. And I think we need courage, honestly. And so I just kind of want to look at an Old Testament story to remind ourselves and to give us courage to face today. And so you probably know this story, man. You probably, especially if you've been to church, you probably know the ending and you know what's going to happen. But I think it's good for all of us, no matter if you know the story or not, to walk through it collectively. And I think it'll give us a lot of hope and a lot of courage no matter what season that we're in right now. And so we're going to be in Daniel chapter 3. And in this chapter, what's going on, just to kind of recap what's going on, we have King Nebuchadnezzar, and this dude was out of his mind. He was nuts. And he took the Israel nation into captivity, into slavery. And he made this rule that every time like horns and instruments would play, that everybody, the entire nation, would have to bow down and worship the statue that he made. And so we see this story, in the middle of the story, that the horns played and everything was happening, and the entire nation bowed down to the statue, except for 3 dudes, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these dudes, man, they were Israelites, and they were serious about their faith, and they were not bowing down to and not worshiping some statue because they worship God alone. And because of their faith, because of their sincerity, they actually get thrown in, and they actually get thrown into trial. And they're in front of this king who's nuts, and the king gives them like one last chance. They give him one last chance to kind of get out of the situation. And I love what these 3 dudes say to the king in the midst of death, in the midst of about to get thrown into a furnace. This is what these 3 dudes say. They say this: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego reply, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty." I love these dudes' faith, man. They had just this type of faith that, like, you know what, we're going to believe in God. And I bet you they didn't know how it was going to happen. They didn't know all the answers. They just believed with all their heart that God was going to save them. And I think that faith is what we need right now. That type of faith that's just believing the best. And it's really hard in the midst of this pandemic right now to really believe that, you know what, God's going to do something crazy. God's going to save us. God's going to heal me. God's going to restore this. God's going to provide for me. It's sometimes really hard to do that. But I love in the midst of their death, they're saying, you know what, God's going to save us. And I think that type of faith God wants to stir in you right now in this moment. But you know what? I actually love what they say next more than what they just said. And in verse 18, they say this, but even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set. Man, they're just like, you know what, even if we get thrown into this furnace, even if we have to die, we're not bowing down. We're not bowing down to your idol. We're not bowing down to our bully. And so I think maybe God is using this season in your life to teach you to say, you know, even if I don't get healed, even if I don't get my next paycheck, even if things don't turn out the way I want them to turn out, that I'm not gonna be afraid, that I'm not gonna bow down to depression, I'm not gonna bow down to my fear and anxiety and my loneliness, that I'm gonna still worship God and still believe in him. And so what happens is the king gets really mad and he just makes the furnace like 7 times hotter. And what happens is they get thrown into the furnace, and they get thrown into the furnace, and they're supposed to just be obliterated. But then they look, and a couple of the king's workers look, and they see, and they, yo, king, come over here. And they look, and they see a 4th person in that furnace. And a lot of theologians say that was Jesus protecting Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the midst of the fire. And I just want to encourage you real quick, no matter what type of trial you're walking through, no matter if you feel like you're walking through fire right now, know that if you're his child, he's never going to leave you. He's never going to forsake you, that he's with you in the fire, that there's another in the fire. But here's the best part about this whole story. Because this story is cool because guess what happens? They get saved and everything is fine. But the coolest part of the story to me, though, is actually in verse 28. It says this, then Nebuchadnezzar, after seeing all that just happened, said, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, this dude is nuts. This dude is psychotic. And he just ended up praising God because of their faith and because how Jesus rescued them. I think God wants us to have that even if type faith, not only to change us, but to change the world around us. That when chaos abounds and when we're literally walking through fire, that even if we have that even if type faith, the world's going to look at us and want to believe and want to worship our God because of our faith. And I think God deeply cares about the world. I think God deeply cares about other people knowing him, and he wants to use you in your story to do that and to accomplish that. And so in his mercy, he might allow us to walk through trials and to test our faith, to get us to say even if and believe that God will come through, but also so that other people in the world around us could get saved as well. And so I just want to encourage you that no matter what season of life you're going through, that God can use it for good, and he can take what the enemy meant for evil and turn it for good. And I just kind of want to leave us with this bottom line, that an even if type faith can change you and change this world. That an even if type faith can change you and can change this world. So I want to encourage you in that, and spend some time today just kind of reading through the story on your own, refreshing your heart, restoring your mind, so that you could just fix your thoughts and your heart on what God wants in this season. I love you guys, praying for you, and I believe the best is yet to come.